and also in later life, where does the psychiatric evidence push back against the idea that there's a single magic age at which someone becomes capable of consenting to their own reproductive health care? You're welcome, Professor Musi.
Thank you very much, moderator. I'm very happy, ladies and gentlemen, to be here in Zimbabwe for the second time. First time I was in transit, stopped a little bit, bought a t-shirt called Harare, Zimbabwe. That was a few years ago. I still have that t-shirt. I forgot to bring it. It is interesting, as a psychiatrist observing Nimrod walking back there with his black shirt and beige trousers. Simba is dressed the same way, and I'm dressed the same way. But what is interesting is his question, which he put before I go into my presentation. Having a single fixed age at which things must begin, but having no terminal age at which things must end. That's the question which baffles us, especially on the continent, as our leaders become older, and we begin to have questions, actually the whole world. And one wonders whether if we have a beginning age, whether we should not have an end age. But we're going to talk about something. By the way, my name is Musisi, which means earthquake. It means when I arrive, I shake things. I have Simba here, which means lion, representing strength in Zimbabwe here. So we are going to shake up things a little bit. You've been hearing a lot of legalese. You're going to hear now a lot of medicinese. Meaning that in medicine, we tend to define things so that we can operate in a single way. People's mental capacity with age. I began by saying, what is capacity? Capacity is the ability to do something. Now, mental capacity, therefore, is the ability of the brain to order and direct a course of action. That's very important, whether it is a thought or an action. The brain is the master. We are therefore talking about two things here. What is natural, or what is nature, and what is nurture. The things that we acquire, which are not necessarily inborn, but which are going to be directed by something which is biologically inborn. And it begins very early on. Think of a newborn. Who orders that child to suckle that breast? But they do, universally. Instinctive drive. Sex is instinct. All life forms do it, be them snakes, be them birds, be them lions, be them elephants, without being taught. Many of you here have already started your sexual journey. There was no school you went to teach you that. There was no referee to say, start. Let's go. But somehow, instinctively, you did it. Now we are saying it should be regulated. Regulating instincts is very difficult and problematic, as we shall see. Many of these instinctual drives are governed by what we call lower brain functions. You know, they just come and you do it. Eating, movement, you know, there are no schools for those things. But the higher executive functions are almost universally dictated by the brain, consciously. Some animals in their development, in their evolutionary development, never acquired those higher instinctive, or those higher executive functions. But they're a function of human beings. We are here doing very high executive functioning, as you see. So, from instinct to executive functioning is a developmental curve, and that is important. When does it reach that time? And you say now the brain is mature. You've heard what Nimrod told you about some definitions. But I'll tell you a story by a very famous late professor. He was called Okot Bitek. He did his PhD in London in literature. He came to Makerere University, and he said he had specialized in storytelling, and he wanted a job. And they told him there are no faculties here for storytelling. So he wrote a book called Song of Lawino, and it became a masterpiece on the continent. He later became professor of literature. But he asked a question at that time in Makerere. When a girl became pregnant, they expelled her. And he said, And before he posed that question, the residences for males were called boys' hostels, and for women were called girls' hostels. So he said, in Africa, when does a girl become a woman? That's the question he posed. And at the end of that debate, pregnancy was no longer a means, or was no longer a crime in Makerere University for a girl. You could continue education. And the halls of residence became women's halls and men's halls. No longer girls, no longer boys. So, the question then goes about regulating those higher functions, which are supposed to be by mature people. I thought we could talk a little bit about that, to know about the nature and nurture, before we go into this very big debate, which we are now talking about. Higher functions, as we said, are controlled by the brain, which must develop slowly with the time, continues developing until when it is mature in your late 20s. But meanwhile, you go on acquiring little by little these various functions. Now, nurture modifies them. In other words, the environment. So what is nurture? It also breaks out into little bits. Social, culture, parenting, education, religion, the environment in which we are shapes that. Imagine rural versus urban development or living. A child growing up in the rural area, I asked him that question. How does rural Zimbabwe look like compared to urban Zimbabwe? The experience that you acquire as you mature, as you go on in life, shapes your thinking, or shapes the brain, your exposure. And then that age, which keeps on developing your brain into an evolving capacity. You heard about that by one of the presenters yesterday. In other words, you begin to take personal charge of yourself. But I wanted to go back a little bit in history. Now after your brain has matured, then you go and say, but what has shaped the collective thinking of Africans as we are in society today? And in Africa, we must never forget what has happened to the continent. For 400 years, Africans were considered animals. They were trapped, enslaved, and taken, and herded, and reared into stocks, and sold to serve other peoples. For 400 years. That's a long time. So Africans were not viewed as part of humanity. We have fought over that. When that ended, we were then colonized to change us into them, to think like them. And then we were occupied. And we fought against that. And most of our thinking is like that. It's almost subconscious, has been shaped by these up to today. When, I don't want to mention people's names, but when Trump speaks, you begin to hear these things. When they do things about Africa, when they call us shithouse countries, you know what that means. So, these things we have to bear in mind as we go on to discussing this thing. In other words, we did not have agency to decide what is ours, what should be ours. It was disregarded. Colonialism was about conquer, convert, and so-called civilize, which they called education. So we went on with this and shapes our approach to healthcare and our approach to what we call our so-called morals, because these ones are being dictated by civilizations outside Africa. So our current thinking now has to be viewed with that historical knowledge that we know. But other things keep on changing because the world is changing. You know, there's now climate change, geographical, geopolitical forces, wars, and things like that. Now, how does this then come into this discussion today about age and decision making? One, age determines how we individually understand the world, how you understand the world. A newborn doesn't understand it the way an adolescent understands it, does not understand it the way an adult understands it, does not understand it the way the aged understand. So age becomes very important in our considerations. So we have these so-called age-related competencies, or what you call evolving capacities. And I thought I could just go through some of them. For example, a newborn is basically instinct. You produce them, they want to suck the breast. Reflex. They go through infancy to childhood. We have what we call concrete thinking. They cannot abstract. They can't think beyond what they see. And that's the way they view the world. And then you mature further into adolescence, and you begin to abstract, you begin to add 2 and 2. You know, you begin to think, to plan as time goes on. And then you become a young adult, and then you think you're really grown up. But as you've heard, you're not yet grown up because the brain is still maturing and is still experiencing the world. But you're making decisions all along as you go on, including sex. Being driven by some instinctive drive which you don't understand very well, but yet you have it. And then you reach middle age, and then you begin to see the world in a different way. And then things begin to change. You become old, and you say young old, maybe 60 to, or 60, in Africa 60, maybe 65 to 75, then middle old, then old, yeah? And the curve begins to go down. Now, in infancy, you have your neurons, you have your brain cells, they're called neurons, they're called neurons. But they are not yet mature or connected enough. The connections are not there. So some functions cannot happen. For example, you can't walk when you have just been born. As you mature more, the neurons grow, they connect, they power the muscles, eventually you walk. But then when you reach middle age, actually they begin dying away. And by the time you are my age, you have lost quite a few of them. And you keep losing them. And then things begin to unravel. We call that dementia. And this age-related intellectual decline is a reality that we must face. And that's why it is important to know how to protect the elderly, because they begin to lose part of that brain functioning. So, what factors then go to affect this mental capacity such that if you lose it, you become mentally incompetent to even make decisions for yourself? One, we have talked about age. Neurons grow, or they multiply, or they connect more, and then they lose the connections, and then they die. But also, mental illness can come in, because every one of you has a brain, and that brain can become sick. Like my eyes became sick and I have to wear glasses. Or like other parts of the body become sick. Reproductive organs also become sick. The brain also becomes sick. You can have mental illness which can affect that capacity. And I'm so happy here that Dr. Simba is here because he's a forensic psychiatrist. He'll talk more maybe about those things. Then you have insults to the brain. You can injure it through blunt trauma to the brain, hitting it. It can be infected, meningitis, whatever it is, encephalitis. I don't want to use so many medical terms. Cancers can develop there. You can have drugs, chemicals in the brain, alcohol, you know. Then you can have something which is very challenging. People born with already defective brains. You can call it intellectual challenges or mental retardation. And these are there in our community. And believe me, instinctively, they'll become sexual active, you know. But they can't make that decision, even if they become older. They have to be protected. We have not talked about that group at all in this discussion, but they're there. You know? And then we have acquired deficiencies, B12 deficiencies, things like that. But what is most challenging to us in the Africa of today is this aging population. We have lost our ability to look after our old. There is something that has broken down. People migrate to the urban areas. They migrate to outside countries. They leave the old alone when they're just losing the ability to make decisions or to look after themselves. That I would like us to talk about. So, then we see other factors that go to affect and impact the right to health care at different ages. For example, we can have epidemics or pandemics like we saw in COVID or in Ebola now. You know, I had to fill in all kinds of forms just to come to Zimbabwe because Uganda has been declared not yet Ebola free. Access begins to become impaired to care. We saw it in COVID. Availability of measures that go to help health care. Poverty, when we can't afford anymore, you know. Government policies and legislations is what we have been talking about here since we began the conference. Impeding access to care or defining it differently, you know, as if it is new. And I'll come to that a little bit. Funding issues. You know, in my country, we don't have universal health insurance. You know, we have universal health care, government given, but we don't have universal health insurance. Now, universal health insurance would mean that you can get your care from anywhere. Private hospitals, government hospitals, missionary hospitals, but it's not there. Then we have international factors, what I call factors from outside. For example, when the government came, the present government in America came in under Trump, and they said they called us shit house kind of countries, and they banned USAID. You know what that did to all of us? HIV/AIDS programs were affected, access to health care. Many of the NGOs were not funded anymore, and they're closing down, and it's causing a lot of problems. Children's programs were closed, not to mention those for the adults or for the ages which were not even started yet. Then we have other factors that come in. War, I'll talk a little bit more about that. Because at any one given time in Africa for the last so many years, 50, people are fighting. You know, people have fought here, people have fought in Uganda, people fought in South Africa, we fought for independence, we fought to remove colonialists, we are now fighting each other. Congo is fighting, South Sudan is fighting, West Africa, the wars are breaking out, Boko Haram is there, fundamentalisms. We are always fighting and traumatizing ourselves. And that impairs access to health care. And wars de-enfranchise or affect children, women, and the elderly most. They can't run. The young ones go to the war front or they run away. They leave them behind. And we saw a lot of these difficulties. We have seen it in all our countries that have been affected by war or continue to be affected by war. They
Prof?
bring in things that are not normally, or which should have been controlled normally. Rampant sexuality and rapes, in war. For example, in DRC, they say about 80% of the women get raped. Children get raped. There are rapes everywhere. And then we have to deal with some legislations. Being raped in a war conflict zone by the enemy,
Prof?
and
Prof?
then you're forced to carry that pregnancy.
Prof,
And you
Prof
produce it
Musisi.
when you know it was rape on you and by the enemy. That is something that needs to be, I want you to think about it. Let's think of some of these international wars. For example, they say Hamas raped some Jews, Jewish women. Can you imagine them producing Hamas children? That's what we're also asking Africans, that if we have been fighting wars and there have been these mass rapes from the enemy and just genocide type of wars, and they're supposed to produce those children. So those things become very difficult. Then we have influences from culture, religions, that we have. Most of these religions, by the way, are foreign. They are not even indigenous to the country. And then we have migration, then we have misogyny, and all of these things. So, I don't know whether you're standing up to tell me it is time or give me a few or 3 more minutes. I'm just beginning to enjoy myself. Then we have, let's talk about some guiding principles to inform legislation in regulating these age-related factors. One, we talked about giving Africans agency, we coming to determine what it is that we should be doing. I call it Afrocentrism. Finding African problems, finding African solutions to African problems by engaging Africans. And how do we do that? We have to fight this wrong colonial education we have had, which creates unconscious bias in us as we go to making decisions and debating about them. Or have this colonial and neo-colonial kind of thinking, has to be thinking, so that we go down, remove these ideological biases through religions, through foreign cultures, fundamentalisms, so that we can actually have Afrocentric ways of dealing with that. And to me, I think that the only way to do that currently is to go back. We are not saying retrogress, to whatever it is that we are doing before, no, but to have a thinking about what is it that tends to be genuinely African. And I call that Ubuntu. In Ubuntu, and I'm going to read these things here, no kids were called bastards. If you go to your native languages and you try to look for that word, it probably did not exist. A child was a child born. A child is innocent. There were no age barriers to care. You cared for the newborn, you cared for the old. You cared for the poor, you cared for the rich. Healthcare was not tiered to private, semi-private, or whatever it is. It was just universal. Knowledge was not monopolized. It was known by everybody. For example, there's a plant which is used all over Africa to treat malaria. We call it mululuza. I've forgotten the scientific name, it's very long. But knowledge was known for everybody. It was not monopolized for sale. The rites of passage were there, which somebody talked about, through sex education to initiate you into adult sexuality and responsibility.
Prof, as you conclude.
There was sexuality education. So to say that it's un-African to talk about sex, no, it's very African. It was regulated. And as I finished my talk, I said here how the old were cared for, both men and women. I did some research looking after elderly people. Who was looking after who? And I found that elderly people who were men were looked after either by their daughters, special educated daughters, or by younger women they had married in old age. But elderly women there was nobody left to look after them. And they suffered more, you know. And that was a very eye-opening thing for me. And in Ubuntu, generations looked after generations. The strong middle looked after the young and the old, and we all lived together. There were no nursing homes for the elderly to be dumped there, and they were not derived of their property. No, this is Ubuntu. That's why I say that what we need is to Justice there, the lady Justice there, who said we must have research to inform legislators in how to approach this problem. Age as a determinant for sexual reproductive health rights. We have to do some research, but not based on Project 2025, no, based on what we ask our African questions in our present context to answer those questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Professor Musisi. You can tell he's a prof. My apologies for interrupting you. But you spoke about issues of nurture and nature. And I think it's also very important for us to also recognize that as we are all here, we are all going to grow old, but we want to have a legal and social system that protects our sexual and reproductive health and rights. And as Professor Musisi mentioned, as we go older, the instinct to, the sexual desire doesn't dissipate. And that's something that we need to be aware of. I want to keep with the scientific theme and invite Dr. Simba to reflect on how, in your clinical practice, issues to do with social and environmental factors, but also, the fact that you advocate for a holistic view of mental well-being, how do these factor in and shape a young person, but also an older person's decision? Issues to do with consent, issues to do with mental capacity, also issues to do with being able to access sexual and reproductive health and rights. You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you for the warm welcome, Mr. Nimrod. And may I ride on the already established protocols. So I'm glad that we are dressed similar. That speaks to a bit of anointing that when I'm invited here in a few years, I'll be speaking as professor and not as Dr. Masorodze. So speaking to our topic and our title, my line of work, I work in both the public and private sector. My public work involves forensic psychiatry, so I have stood before judges and lawyers being bullied. So I'm glad that the dynamic has changed. Now I'm in the front seat and I'm not in a little corner testifying as to the mental capacity of an individual. But basically, our work involves, determining the mental capacity, whether of a perpetrator or of a victim at the time of crime. And basic principles apply when we talk of that. So when we talk of mental capacity, it's a cognitive aspect, or it speaks to the mental abilities of an individual. And there are certain factors that we take into consideration when we're looking at, say, a victim or someone who is being assessed of their ability to make a choice, whether it's a child who has been sexually assaulted and is looking for sexual and reproductive assistance in the medical aspect, or it's an adult whose mental capacity to make decisions is being questioned in terms of curatorship and ownership of their well-being. So when we talk of capacity, there are four basic factors that we look at Number one is the individual able to understand what we're talking about. When we say what are the implications of unprotected sexual intercourse in a 17-year-old or in a 28-year-old who is diagnosed with an intellectual disability, a 17-year-old may coherently and adequately explain the implications of unprotected sexual intercourse because they are exposed, they know. So that nullifies the aspect of age, where we talk of age being a determinant. A 28-year-old who has a severe mental disability may not be able to make decisions and understand what is happening to them. We also speak about appreciation of the facts that are presented to them. So is an individual able to appreciate the knowledge that they're giving? We speak about reasoning. The reasoning capacity of an individual also comes into play when we talk about the mental capacity. And finally, we also talk about, is the individual able to communicate their will or to coherently express what they want? It differs greatly from compliance. So capacity versus compliance speaks to, say, an elderly patient who is under my care. It's my grandfather or my father who is now old, and they are under my roof and they're under my care. They may comply to certain decisions because, these decisions have an implication on their well-being or how much they're being cared for. So that's also an important aspect. So compliance then brings in the social and the cultural norms that are associated with such decision making. In my introduction, it was spoken about the holistic approach to mental health and mental health care. We have a model that we use in psychiatry that is called the biopsychosocial model of care. This speaks to, number one, the biological aspect. So if there is a family history of mental disorder, there is some vulnerability in the next generations of people having mental disorder. Other factors such as substance use and abuse, intoxication also come into play when we talk about the biological aspect. I was speaking to my colleague from Malawi, Molly, who I'm sitting with there, and we spoke about the changes that occur even before an adult is expected to make a decision, where if a child is exposed to alcohol in utero, or if a mother who is breastfeeding is taking substances and abusing substances, exposes that child may fail to get to a stage where they have normal mental capacity, even if they have achieved the age. So that's the biological aspect. The psychological aspect speaks to how you are brought up, the trauma that an individual is exposed to, the upbringing, the family structure. If it's a highly expressive environment, that can influence the mental capacity. And then the social aspect speaks to the environment where someone comes from. So poverty is an important factor. That's where people in the lower socioeconomic bracket are exposed, or they are more likely to have mental disorders that diminish their mental capacity. So these are all factors that we look at. To close off, I want to just conclude with a comparison between the capacity assessments that we do in the private and public sector. Given the shortage of mental health care professionals in the African aspect, Zimbabwe is about 28 psychiatrists, 18 of which are practicing in the government sector. And these are people who are expected to see a patient and come up with an opinion over their mental capacity or their mental state within a short period of time, often running long clinics. So this compromises the level of care. When I was practicing at Harare Hospital, we'd often get a truck full of victims coming from one of the provinces. And these individuals are supposed to be assessed and go back to their rural homes within a 3-4 hour period. So that can compromise the quality of assessments. It's often hard to separate an adult, the caregiver and the parent from the victim in where we are doing the assessment. So that speaks to the challenges that we have. And as recommendations for assessing mental capacity in different individuals, I would suggest that we come together as the medical, the law sector, to come up with structured tools that can be taught to different cadres so that we have task shifting and task sharing mechanisms where assessment can be done by non-specialists. So it's a structured tool that we would validate and say, this helps to assess the capacity. And also, rather than looking at an age-based assessment of capacity, let's move on to a capacity and the mental capacity-based method of assessing mental capacity of individuals. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Simba. And as you can see, none of the panelists, at least as far as I know, is a lawyer. And that is very deliberate because it also shows how other disciplines can and should inform this discussion. It's not enough for, I think, and that's why I asked earlier about whether we need to relook into the issue of 18 is the cutoff. And so if you have 2 minors engaging in any form of sexual activity, should they be criminalized? And one of the things that we're getting from the panel, that we've gotten, for instance, from Dr. Simba, is that it's not enough to just simply look at legislation. So from science to practice, and here I would like to invite Ms. Tukamshaba to reflect on Uganda's policies, especially around adolescent health, and whether, in your opinion, so be honest, I know you work with the Ministry of Health. In your opinion, everything that we've just heard about age being, a multidisciplinary category rather than a fixed number, how does Ugandan policy define and treat adolescents today, and does that help or hinder our ability to address our SRHR burden? You're welcome, Mr. Komshaba. A round of applause, please.
Yes, good afternoon, members. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Yes, I'm happy to be part of this conference, and I'm going to speak as a policymaker, but also a person that has really interacted with adolescents for very many years. At times, I like it when I really talk from experience, what the adolescents or what the young people face as challenges as they grow up. We know that age strongly determines how young people access reproductive health services, and we know that it's a major legal and cultural barrier, much as we know that in our country, adolescents are still considered as children, and we have come up with policies on reproductive health as Ministry of Health that favor the provision of youth-friendly services in our public facilities, but also the private facilities, because we also want to know what the young people, adolescents who are seeking services from the private facilities feel compared to the public facilities. And the legal framework is there, policy and legal framework is there for the Ministry of Health. We have what we call the Reproductive, Maternal, Child, Newborn and Adolescent Health. It's the overarching document that guides implementation of adolescent health interventions at different levels, right from national level to subnational level. And in this framework, it looks at what is it that the adolescents at whichever age should be able to receive as a service. I want to agree with Professor where he was saying that Ubuntu was the way to go. Gone are the days when we would know that it is the community to raise a child. But these days, Professor, I can assure you that it is a different story. We are very worried of our children being taken care of by other people, because we are seeing a lot of violence cases. When you look at our data as Ministry of Health Uganda, the data that is coming through for GBV cases are children below 18 years. And you get worried when you say that, okay, my child, I'm leaving my girl with the uncle at home, because you don't know what happens next. So as Ministry of Health, we are saying the policies that are in place, the interventions that we are designing, how do we bring on board the duty bearers, the community leaders, the health workers? Why is it that the health workers, when they see a young girl talk about family planning, she's in secondary, or she's in primary, she's 17, she's 16. At the age of 16 years, you're supposed to be in school. The health worker takes it as if this child has no idea about sex, which is not true. We are seeing children watching, being on social media and using phones and Googling everything they feel they need to know about themselves as they grow up. And as parents, do we have control over that? The children know too much than what we expect. So if I'm 15 years and I walk into a facility and say, I feel like this, I have a boyfriend. Some of them, I'm talking from experience, I've interacted with some of the adolescent girls who say that for me at 15 years, I would want to receive a contraception. 15 years, you ask, but you're in school, why would you go for that? Until you take her through why she's in school, explaining how she needs to stay in school, concentrate on her studies, wait until is when at times she understands, says, okay, this is the guidance that I need. For our facilities to be friendly, we've tried to build the capacity of our providers to be non-judgmental and have this positive attitude towards this girl or towards this adolescent or towards this person who comes in a facility and wants a service. So our policies, we have our general policies which look at an adolescent in a holistic way, ensuring that she receives an integrated package of services, including SRH services and mental health that our colleague was talking about. These children are getting a lot of tortures, even schools education is giving them a lot of mental disorders. How do we support this girl? How do we support this boy who feels that at the age of 16 years, 17 years, she feels she needs to live an independent life? And from the experience of engaging with the adolescents, they're asking, how much are you engaging us? As you're making policies, are we part of the policies? They keep insisting nothing for us without us. So whichever policies we have developed as Uganda, as Ministry of Health, we have ensured that the young people, as a standard, they must participate in the development of these policies so that they are able to articulate their issues very well, tell us what they want, and how they want these services delivered, and what are the key services that they feel should be included in the package. So we realize it doesn't make sense for us to come up with policies as programmers at national level when the young person in the deep down in the villages is not even aware of, does not even know what a policy means. So engaging them frequently at policy development, at implementation, at evaluation is really what has made us achieve some of the interventions or our targets as a country. And we have also emphasized to the parents that much as we are looking at these children as young, they already know a lot. How much do we engage? Because I know most of us here as parents, it's very difficult to have a discussion on SRH with our children. My girl got into her periods at 10 years, they happen. If this girl gets this information, or this boy is aware that as I grow up, this is what happens. By the time she's 18 years, says, yes, much as I'm an adult, but I'm not yet ready for what? For a relationship, because at 18, maybe she's joining A-level, or she's going to the university. And for us in Uganda, as long as you're still in school, you're still a child. You're still in school, you're still a child. Including university, because you're still under the care of your parents. They're paying for your school fees, they're paying for your tuition. So our legal framework is good for both in and out of school, and we are working in collaboration as a different aligned ministries, Ministry of Education,